Okay, we are recording the book of Judges, and we are going to summarize chapter 17 through 21, which is a continuous story. If you read those chapters, one chapter leads directly into another and continues what took place in the first couple of verses of chapter 17. So let's go ahead and begin with the outline. Chapter 17 deals with Micah's idolatry. Now, according to the scriptures, there was a man, and his name was Micah from the tribe of Ephraim, and he stole 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother and then returned them. Now, I find it odd that his mother blessed her son for returning the money. There was no rebuke, there was no correction, there was no discipline, and she even gave a portion of the money to him to create a household god. It says in verse 3 and 4, he took the money and he made a graven image and a molten image. So this reveals his fallen nature. He wanted to make God into his own image. In verse 5, he establishes a very elaborate worship center. Micah first sets up a shrine, kind of a sort of a small temple, a place where others came to worship these idols. He made an ephod. Micah imitated the worship at the true tabernacle of God by making an ephod. It was a specific garment worn by the priests of Israel, and then he created household idols in addition to the first idol. He consecrated, according to the scriptures, one of his sons who became his priest in order to establish this false religion. That's what he did. So he completed the process. Now, all of this came from Micah, not from God. This was a completely man-orientated and man-centered religion. Therefore, the purpose of the shrine, the beautiful ephod, the attractive idols, the established priesthood, was to serve and please man, not God. And in verse 6, we get a summary of the spiritual condition of Israel. There was no king in Israel. Now, this is prior to the election of Saul, the people's choice, but it speaks about the spiritual decline and decay in the nation of Israel. And it adds, if you read all these chapters together, it says several times, there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You see that in verse 6. This refers to the radical individualism that marked the time of the judges. People looked to self for their guide to morality and ethics. Kind of sounds similar to our Christian culture today. The people genuinely felt that they did what was right, but the measurement of what was right was according to their own eyes. Now, in verses 7 to 8, Micah hires an unscrupulous Levite. It says that there was a man from Bethlehem who was a Levite. Now, as a Levite, they had cities to live in that God provided for them. They had a place established by God to minister. However, he wanted to do what was right in his own eyes and went about offering himself as a priest for hire wherever he could find a place. And this would be parallel to John chapter 10 that talks about the hireling. So he came to Ephraim and to the house of Micah. This explains how the two of them hooked up together. Now, Micah recognizes that he is of the Levitical tribe, and He says, I want you to dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me. Micah wanted this Levite to stay with him and work as a priest. He did this because he wanted to legitimize his personal shrine by having an officially recognized priest serving there. Deep down, he knew that his idolatry was false and meaningless, but he hoped that this would make it legitimate. Now, notice he offers to pay. He says, I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance. So, for 10 shekels and a suit of clothes, the Levite hires himself out to the idolatry of Micah. The Levite was a perfect example of a hireling, someone who served God or an idol for what he could get, instead of serving to glorify God. And the Levite, according to the scriptures, was content to dwell with Micah. The arrangement seemed perfect to everybody, and Micah felt he had gained a son. Now, verses 12 to 13, Micah consecrates the Levite. Consecration meant nothing at all because this was a system of idolatry. He had no authority from God to declare a renegade Levite as set apart or consecrated by God to the service of this idolatrous shrine. In this tragic account, each person is guilty of a terrible sin. Yet we could say that the Levite was more guilty than Micah was. We can say this because the Levite was at least supposed to know the Word of God. And the scriptures say, now I know that the Lord will be good to me since I have a Levite as a priest. Micah's confidence was just as false as his consecration was. They were both based on superstition, not on God's word. Now, we can say that Micah was utterly sincere, and we can also say that he was utterly wrong. Sincerity is nice, but it gets you nowhere if it is not coupled with truth. A person who sincerely thinks they can swim across the Pacific Ocean will drown just as surely as the person who isn't as sincere. In Judges 18, we see the lazy Danites. Now, the Danites, according to verse 1 and 2 of Judges 18, sent spies to look for land to take among the people of Israel. Now, they had been given an inheritance. Up to that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. They had not taken possession of the land that was given to them. They were lazy. It was too difficult to fight for what God promised to give them. So the scripture says that they went to the mountains of Ephraim. What are they doing there? They're looking for easier land to conquer and to make their own. The Danites came to the land of the tribe of Ephraim and the house of Micah. Now, interesting, talk about the sovereignty of God. They recognized the voice of this young Levite. It could have been that the spies from the tribe of Dan knew the renegade Levite personally, or it is also possible that they simply recognized his accent as being from the southern part of Judea. So what do? They ask him to inquire of God that whether their journey will be prosperous or not. Now, this shows the spiritual confusion of the day of Israel. Now, watch this. These Danites, on a sinful mission, met with a sinful Levite and wanted to know from a righteous God if their mission would be successful. Then the sinful Levite sent the sinning men on their way, supposedly with God's blessing. Now they come to a city of Laish, and the people of Laish lived in a very similar manner to the Sidonians. The Danites found a city nearby that was not occupied by the Israelites, but was a colony of the Sidonians. Now, this is a pagan group of people. This was the group that God told Israel to drive out of the land of Canaan, according to Joshua 13, verse 4. Now, when they report back, they said, "We have seen the land, and indeed it is very good." The city was not heavily defended, and the Danites believed this would be a good city to conquer and take as their own territory. So what do? They assemble 600 men armed with weapons of war. Curiously, they assembled an army of 600 men to fight for the city of Laish in the land of the tribe of Ephraim. So basically, Laish belonged to Ephraim, and so they're trying to steal it away from one of their brothers. Yet they could not fight for the land of their own tribal allotment. That's very strange. God gave them a land. God promised to go before them and rid them, but they were too lazy to seize God's promise. But they were courageous enough to steal something from their brothers. Now, the tribe of Dan adopts Micah's idolatry, according to verse 14 to 18. Entering, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten image that he had made. Again, a reflection of the low morality and the strong religious feelings of I can do what I want to. Now, the Levite goes with the army from the tribe of Dan, so he deserts Micah, who had paid him, and he is looking for a better deal. So the priest's heart was very glad when they said that they would compensate him for going along with him. The Levite did not care about Micah, only for the pay and status that he might get by being the priest for a whole tribe instead of a mere family. In fact, the Danites even worded it that way. Will you not be more compensated by an entire tribe than a few people? In verses 22 to 24, Micah's foolish idolatry comes to nothing. He complains to the Danites, "You have taken away my gods, which I made." Now, this is very strange because Micah had to rescue his own gods. Obviously, his gods should be able to care for themselves. And we wonder if Micah saw the foolishness of the speech that was coming out of his heart. We each worship a God of our own making, or we worship the true God who made us. Micah was foolish enough to have a priest who would be taken away, and it reminds us of how wonderful it is, as we've been studying in the book of Hebrews, that we have a high priest who cannot change and who can never be taken away from us. This also shows how empty Micah's idolatry was. His false gods did not bring him any lasting good. False gods speak great promises, but never fulfill what they say. Now, in verses 25 to 26, the army of the tribe of Dan refuses to give Micah his God back, so Micah goes home empty-handed. Now, this event and these words, "Lest anger come upon you and you lose your life," they were basically telling Micah, be quiet. In this event, these words illustrate the general lawlessness in Israel during this long period of judges. There was a time to speak against someone in such a fashion would have resulted in potential death. Now, when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he left and he went home, and his God offered no protection to him whatsoever. In verses 27 to 29, the Danites approached the city and rename it after themselves. To Laish, the people were quiet and secure. There was no deliverer for them. They were not prepared for invasion or a war. This was written in a way meant to make us at least a little sympathetic for the people of Laish. The people of Israel were instructed to take the land from the Canaanites, but this seemed like an unprincipled attack from wicked men of the tribe of Dan. They named the city after themselves. Now, the reason that this is a wicked, unprovoked attack is because this was not the inheritance that God gave to them. They were too lazy to appropriate what God had blessed them with. So the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved images, according to verse 30 and 31. This was the beginning of established idolatry in Israel in the promised land. There was individual idolatry in Israel long before this, but this was official idolatry, if you please. In chapter 19, we get this strange story about a Levite and his concubine. Again, we read, "There is no king in Israel." Again, this sets the stage for the terrible story that we will survey here in this chapter and in chapter 20 and 21. Now, this Levite took for himself a concubine. A Levite's concubine was recognized as a legal partner, but she did not have the same status in the home or in society as a wife. In this sense, a concubine was a legal mistress. I find it odd that a religious person like the Levi would even consider lowering his moral standards and appearance of morality by doing this. However, many prominent men in the Old Testament had concubines: Abraham, Jacob, Caleb, Saul, David, Solomon, who had 300 concubines, Rehoboam. We never see this kind of family life blessed by God, however. Let me repeat that. We never see God blessing this type of practice. Now, the Levite wants to reconcile with the concubine. She left him. So he goes to get her. He wants to try to reconcile. Now, notice his approach. He went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. Here, the Levite was an example of how an offended spouse should act when there is adultery. Though she broke the bond between them, he worked hard to bring the relationship back together and succeeded. Now, when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Perhaps the father was glad to see the Levite and his daughter go back home, and perhaps he was simply glad to have his daughter out of the house again. Now, he stays several days, and when the fourth day came, he was trying to prepare to leave. However, the father-in-law imposed upon him to stay another day, one more night. So he did. And on the next day, he proposes to leave, but the father-in-law imposes again, and he didn't start off on his journey until the afternoon. Now, keep in mind that a Levite would seek to find a city where he could stay with a Jewish family for hospitality. and it was getting late, and he would have to travel through part of the night to finally come to a Jewish city for refuge. Now, as he returns, he comes to a foreign city. The Levite and his concubine considered a pagan town too dangerous. They went on to Gibeah, a city of Israel, because they thought they would be safer there. However, when they got there, verses 11 to 15, no one would take them in. The Levite and his concubine found no hospitality. Now, this reflects poorly on the people of Gibeah because God commanded hospitality among the people of God. Leviticus 19 and chapter 25, Matthew 25, and Hebrews chapter 13 are all passages that speak of showing hospitality from one Jew to another. Now, finally, an Ephraimite, 16 to 21, finds them huddled up in the city square and offers refuge for them. And in verse 22, we begin to see the dreadful results of this Levite priest. In verse 22, men of the city surrounded the house and beat on the door. The word beat there, the verb form, means to beat down the door, to loudly pound on the door. This was not a polite request or a casual request. What did the men want? Bring out the men who came to your house that we may know him. What are they saying? We want to have homosexual relationships with the Levite. Now, bells and whistles should be going off in your mind, similar to Genesis 19 and Sodom and Gomorrah. So this was taking place during the time of Judges in certain pockets of the inheritance. Now, in verses 23 to 26, this gets very, very perverted. The man took his concubine and brought her out to them. Though the perverted men of Gibeah were clearly guilty, the Levite and the host of the home were equally guilty. They clearly should have been willing to sacrifice themselves before their own daughters and companions. This is a very sordid story that is told, and unfortunate consequences that will take place that we'll see here in a minute. Now, the master of the house was willing to sacrifice his own daughter, and the Levite cared nothing for his concubine and willing to sacrifice her. And the scripture says that they knew her and abused her. So throughout the evening and early morning hours, they sexually abused her in every perverted way that they could think of. Remember, Romans chapter 1 talks about men doing perverted things with other men. In the morning, verse 27 and 30, the Levite gets up, opens the door, and finds her painfully laying on the ground with all of her wounds and emotional and mental and physical pain that she went through. So he gets up, goes to the door, sees her there, and if you read the text in chapter 19, verse 27 to 30, he says, "Get up and let's get going." My goodness, such painful, heartless communication of this Levite toward his concubine. Now that indicates to you the male understanding of a concubine. They were simply a possession to be used and for their convenience. And when she dies, he does something equally drastic as as opposed, not as opposed, but on top of the grotesque way that she was treated. He cuts her up into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all of the territory of Israel. He was trying to deliver a message that what they had done was evil and wicked in the sight of God. I might add that he should have carved himself up as well and had someone put him in the box along with his concubine. Chapter 20, we see the retribution that will take place. Now, the Levite the Levite sent his concubine to each of the 12 tribes. And when they opened the box, I guess, or however his concubine was sent, they were startled, they were stunned, and they discovered who had done this. So it says in verse 1 and 2, the nations gathered at the Levites' request. All the children of Israel came out. In and of itself, this is a positive sign to see Israel gather together for such a reason. They were willing to deal with the problem of sin in their midst. They recognize the sin and they're willing to deal with it. Unlike the defeat at Ai, and God had to tell Joshua, who was complaining about the defeat, there's sin in the camp, get up and deal with it. The leaders of the people and all the tribes of Israel presented themselves. Now, they're following scripture here, and it's interesting as you read through the book of Judges, and even today, people follow scriptures when they want to. But Deuteronomy 13, 12 to 18 instruct Israel how to deal with such abominations among them. It was first a test for the truth of the accusation. If the charges were true, they must then utterly destroy those who committed such an abomination. In verses 3 to 7, they inquire how this wicked deed happened. The children of Benjamin wanted to know so they could do something about this outrage. And the Levites said they intended to kill me, but instead they ravished my concubine. It's interesting. He spun the story to remove any guilt on his own part for even subjecting his concubine to such treatment. In verses 8 to 11, all of these people rose up as one man to avenge the dark time and bring about retribution. They may repay all of the vileness that they have done to Israel. This was a blot on Israel as a nation. They had enough black eyes. They didn't need this huge black eye because of this sin. In verses 12 to 17, Benjamin sought help, but the children did not give it to him. The children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren. The other tribes of Israel did the right thing in asking the tribe of Benjamin to deliver up the men who committed the crime. The men were living in the area of Benjamin. Now, the other tribes did not want to go to war with Benjamin. All they wanted was, give us the guys who did this. We will punish them. But Benjamin says, no, we are not going to cooperate. Therefore, they added and compounded the original sin that had taken place. Now, it says 700 select men who were left-handed. This is the second time we hear about left-handed warriors. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. The tribe of Benjamin not only failed to support the cause of the other tribes, they actively resisted the other tribes with an assembled army. 700 men. Now, the idea that they could not miss, the word translated miss literally means sin. This illustrates the principle that the word sin literally means to miss the mark, whether you're off by an inch or a yard. Whether Benjamin, besides Benjamin, the children of Israel numbered 400,000 men. And the tribes of Israel prepared for a small civil war. This was not what God intended. He did not intend for his redeemed people to be fighting against one another. Verses 18 to 21, we begin to read about the battle. And let me summarize. Day one, they get ready for battle. They go into battle, and Israel is defeated by Benjamin. And they return, verses 22 to 23, to the Lord, and they are distressed about the defeat. Here we thought we were doing something righteous, and we got whooped. And they spend the day seeking out the Lord. Day two, they go out again. And again, Benjamin defeats them with 18,000 of the children of Israel dying in this battle. And the nation of Israel, the other 11 tribes, are deeply distressed and concerned. What in the world is going on? We are trying to perform righteousness here, and God, it doesn't seem like you are trying to help us out. Now, they came back, and again, they wept and fasted that day and evening before the Lord. And you would wonder, why is this taking place? Well, God was humbling the entire nation. They had to understand that the horror of the crime at Gibeah was not merely the result of sin of one group of men, or even one city, or even one tribe. The whole nation had to be humbled because they first thought that the sin problem was only in Benjamin. Israel had to see that the nation as a whole had a sin problem. So they inquire of the Lord what to do. God didn't want the 2 days of humbling to make Israel think that they could never win. So he encourages them, go out tomorrow and you will have victory. So on the third day, they go out and they divide into two groups. They had a group behind the city, similar to what happened in Joshua 8 at Ai, and the major group of warriors in front. And so as Benjamin came out, the group in front of them began to run away. And Benjamin thought, aha, we got them on the run again. But little did they know that God had sovereignly arranged for them to get boxed in and become defeated. And so when we get to chapter 21, Israel makes a foolish vow. They were very angry at Benjamin. And they made a foolish vow, and they didn't realize the consequences. Kind of like dear old, oh, my brain is going to mush. Who was the judge that made a rash vow? Jephthah. Kind of like Jephthah. And what was their vow? We are not going to give our daughters to anybody from Benjamin because of the evil that they did. And so it became very difficult for Benjamin not to become extinct. They had to continue to propagate their line. So if none of the other tribes were going to let their daughters marry a Benjamite, then they would be contributing to Benjamin marrying the Canaanites. And so they had to come up with another plan. And so the plan they came up with is kind of funny and ridiculous, and it shows how they justified their consequences to ease their conscience. And they said that the ladies would come out and be singing and dancing in the roadway, verses 16 to 24. And if you catch one of them, or literally kidnap one of them, then you can marry them. It won't be an official wedding, but it'll be okay. You can continue with this charade that we have set up. And that is how they helped prevent Benjamin from being extinct because of their foolish vow that they made. Now, in summary, again, we see there is no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in their own eye. This kind of moral, political, social, and spiritual chaos could only happen when there was no recognized king over Israel. Now, hang on for a minute. They did have a king. His name was Jehovah. But they did not want Jehovah to rule over them. And at the end of Judges, when you get into 1 Samuel, you will see these same people cry out to Samuel, we want to be like other nations and have a king rule over us and lead us into battle. Every man did what was right in their own eyes. So for 400 years in the book of Judges, it is marked by radical individualism. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. They rejected the standard of God's word and accepted the individual standard. If it's right to me, if it feels good, whether people think I should do it or not, if I determine it's right, then I'm going to go ahead and do it. And of course, this is a brief series that we did on situation ethics. Let's summarize here. 12 judges that we have studied. We've had, I think, 24 lessons on this. 1 female judge, 1 left-handed judge, 2 from the tribe of Judah, 2 from the tribe of Manasseh. And the longest oppression was 40 years under the Philistines and Samson. 1 judge committed suicide. He was a divorcee and a first-degree murderer. And I hope you remember that was Samson. This concludes the series of 24 lessons. I want to thank you for your faithful participation. Next Sunday, we will not meet because I will be in Michigan. But the following Sunday, 2 weeks from tonight, we will begin a new series. And I want you to give some serious thought to this question. What is the purpose of the gospel? What is the purpose of the gospel? I can pretty well anticipate the majority of your answers. But I want to see if somebody will think, now don't misunderstand me here, that somebody can push through the standard answers. I have no idea why that's blurry. Someone will push through the standard answers about the purpose of the gospel. And I'm not even going to lead you down the pathway to think. I want you to think for yourself. Because this is, I'll give you a hint, okay? This is the missing element of any gospel presentation. That's all I'm going to say. Any thoughts or questions from you, dear folks?
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
The priests for hire that you were talking about, were any of those righteous priests, though? You know, or were they all just out for themselves?
No, there were many, many righteous priests. And just like seminaries today and Bible colleges that can produce people who have studied. There are some that use certain positions in church to climb the ladder. I graduated in 1983, and it was prevalent back in 1983. I did a double major, and the second major I had was youth ministries, because a guy who taught Christian education was a youth pastor, and he was in his 50s still doing it, and he so inspired me. But in talking with those in the youth ministry program, I often heard, well, I'm going to do this for a couple of years, get some experience, and then move on to be a senior pastor. And I thought, that is so wrong. You're a hireling. Unless God moves you out of that, you need to stay in the position that God has called you to serve. So, Sue, yes, many, many righteous priests. And unfortunately, most of them are not identified by name in the Bible. It's the bad apples that are identified in the Bible.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. And that's unfortunate, but that's unfortunate. We see that today in Christendom, and it's a very sad thing. Somebody else. I think one of my cameras has gone on vacation. And Tawanda Carl is open tomorrow, so I'm going to go get my blood work tomorrow. Any other thoughts or questions, folks? Robert is still up in the emergency room. He called me. Bless his heart. He said, would you come up and visit with me? And by the way, would you stop at Walmart and pick me up a phone charger? I said, Robert, I'm sorry, I got a broadcast tonight. And we went through a half a dozen names, and I guess he finally got his girlfriend to come up and visit with him and buy him a phone charger. Anyways, continue to pray for that situation. Any other thoughts or questions before we close?